Hey, welcome back to another episode of Ruby Rogues. This week on our panel, we have Valentino Stoll.
Hey now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. A lot of stuff coming down the pipe on Top End Devs. I'm going to be starting kind of a Ruby Masters group for people to get together and level up their Ruby. So if you're looking for something, a group of people that meets on a weekly basis, we have a call or a class or something, go check it out. I'll do more of a pitch later. We also have a special guest this week, and that's Daniel. I'm not brave enough to try your last name, so why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll get rolling.
Certainly. I go by DB. I live in New York. I'm an engineer. Been working in Ruby since 2010, approximately. I co-maintain
nice.
Ruby Grape, Hashi, a bunch of other Ruby things, Slack Ruby client. So I've spent my entire day today writing Python code, but I'm so excited to talk about Ruby, which is the best programming language.
So is your full-time gig writing Python then?
No, not at all. I've been last 4.5 years. I've been working on open source at AWS. So I've been working on the OpenSearch project, which is a open source fork of Elasticsearch and Kibana, and we maintain the OpenSearch project, and it has some Ruby in it. It has 8 language clients. One of them is OpenSearch Ruby, which I don't write a lot of code in. There's smarter people than me to do that. But today I worked on the OpenSearch Python client, amongst other things.
Okay, sounds good. I was like, oh well, that's usually not a take we get. So yeah, I just thought we'd clarify that. So yeah,
that Ruby is not the best programming language. That's not the take that you get on this podcast.
I'm always just curious because people, I talk to people that do Go or JavaScript or whatever, and it's like,
I'm curious why you think that.
Yeah.
Well, Go you have to check errors twice. This is crazy. It's inhumane. This is Go has more error checking lines than useful code, so that should not even qualify as a programming language.
I don't disagree with you there.
I haven't done enough with it to know, but okay. Why is Ruby better than Python?
Well, I think people in Ruby are very nice, as we all know, and then Ruby has, I think, much better dynamic programming capabilities that make it a delight to use. The libraries, the tooling is also way better put together. Like, it's probably because contributors have not built something good enough, but you take, for example, Rubocop that does all kinds of linting. That's an amazing, awesome project. And if you look in Python, you need to combine isort, Black, PyLint, and another like 5 tools to get the same result. And then each one of the tools has even documentation about here's how you configure the other tools so that it matches my way of configuring it. So like max line length, I have Python projects where there is 8 places where I have to specify that they're all the same number. But so I think the tooling is a lot nicer, and then RBN. There's a lot of equivalence in the Python world, but from the infrastructure, I think Ruby is far superior in how mature and easy it is to use, and how consistent and pleasant it is. It's just pleasant. It's lower stress.
Well, cool. I mean, I've been happy with Ruby for years. We also have somebody that keeps popping on and watching a few seconds and then popping off. So if they pop back on, they're welcome to leave a comment. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Grape. So everybody on this call said they've used it. One of us helps maintain it, and the other 2 of us host this podcast. So yeah, do you want to kind of give people the 10,000-foot view on Grape? Just let them know what it is.
I started using Grape in 2011 when we needed to write an API in Ruby. So actually, maybe a longer story. I joined the startup Artsy. I'm wearing a T-shirt from Artsy, an Artsy offsite from 2017, and Artsy had to quickly build a prototype for a search, an art search that was called the Art Genome Project. So you search for artworks, and Artsy shows you similar works by other artists based on a similarity. So it's a similarity engine. It's very relevant today because a lot of the nearest neighbor search today is what Artsy was developing in 2011. And we wanted to do it in a hurry because 2 or 3 people, little money, no time, investors, all that kind of stuff. So I went around the New York startups and asked a bunch of people, how should I build this? And we're thinking restarting a prototype greenfield. The initial prototype was built by a couple of engineers. It was JBoss, Java, horrible thing. And I just didn't want to touch it. And it didn't work, of course. It's too heavy. And then, so I went around New York startups and I said, what should I use? And Harry at Foursquare at the time was, you should use Ruby on Rails and MongoDB. I was like, okay, let me try that. And I have never done either. So I've never written a line of Ruby. I've never touched MongoDB. I just installed and went running. And then within 3 weeks, we had a working prototype on Ruby on Rails. Then we got serious about doing an API. And I looked of how to build an API with Rails. And I was confused why I have all this HTML stuff going on. I just wanted an API. I didn't want to write any controllers. That's how I stumbled upon Grape. I tried it and loved it because it was actually the language of the APIs. It was highly opinionated, but very easy to use. And I started contributing features to it then, and eventually contributed enough to become its co-maintainer. So I didn't invent Grape by any means, but I've been one of its primary maintainers since about 2011, 2012, 2013, some years, 10 years ago. But Grape was started by the folks at a company called IntraIdea, and they announced it, I think, at RubyConf in 2010 in New Orleans, and it was the initial author, I think, is Michael Bly and Jerry Chang, if I pronounce his name right. They eventually left IntraIdea around 2015, and it became 2015. We created the Ruby Grape org, moved a bunch of projects in it, and made it a real community thing. And so that I've been involved in that ever since. It has some massive amount of stars, forks, and still used by lots of people. So yeah, Grape is a DSL for APIs. If you don't want to write a class controller and want to write get, put, post with an implementation, that's basically a Grape. And then if you want to describe parameters, you write params and you say optional ID, type integer, and off you go, and it does verification for you. So it's a DSL to writing RESTful APIs. It sits somewhere between Sinatra and Rails. Easiest way to write a RESTful API.
And can you write it in more? I've only used it with Rails. You can use it with other frameworks, right?
Oh, absolutely. So I have a bunch of pet projects that never have any Rails in them, and they're all Ruby Grape APIs, and it's mounted on Rack. So Grape, just like Rails, is mounted on Rack. You have a web server, like, I don't know, Puma, then you have Rack, and then you can choose. You can do Rails, you can do Grape, you can do both of them together if you'd like. So they're not mutually exclusive by any means.
So you can do it with any Rack-based applications. You can put it on Rhoda or anything.
Absolutely. It just works.
Good deal. So I'm curious, Valentino, and I'll answer this question in a minute, but where have you used Grape?
Yeah, I have kind of a weird on-ramp to Grape in that I was working at a consultancy, and we had like a healthcare related company come to us, and they had their own like Java, Oracle kind of like enterprise backends that they used, and they were looking to us to just like quickly iterate on making a new like identity service or something. I forget what it was. Something just like purely API driven. And so we're doing some research and came across Grape, and it was like perfect. It like seemed super easy, exactly what we're looking for. We needed like low level controls at the rack level, and Grape it kind of gave that easy snap-in features that we were looking for. And I mean, this predates Rails API, right? Which maybe we would have adopted more. And Sinatra had a lot more things you had to add to it. It wasn't as up to speed as Grape was at the time. Yeah, and so I developed in JRuby using Grape and Oracle, and it worked seamlessly. I will say this was maybe 10 years ago, to be honest. But I really loved how you can just like you can create your own branches of APIs and mount them individually. If you have a Rails app or another rack app, you can mount individual APIs that you want to like keep separated to keep the domain logic together. So it worked really well for what we were trying to apply.
I'm just surprised you weren't. There was no Python in your story.
No, Python in my life that came way later when I started getting into data stuff.
Yeah,
so it's not as interesting.
Yeah, so Grape for me. I mean, I've played with it probably several times over the last several years, and for a lot of the simple APIs, yeah. Can I just rewind and say that the Rails default of adding JSON and JBuilder to my controllers is freaking the wrong decision. And I love David to death, but that default is stupid. Okay, I said it. I've gotten it off my chest. I said my piece. Yeah, running the API, because the API concerns and the API users are different from the UI, from the HTML. And so anyway, I like dividing them out. And yeah, the controller feels like overkill, right? For managing, it's like, oh, go get the data and then render it as JSON. Well, if I need more fine-grained control, something like Grape is really, really nice. So
yeah, I think if you wanted to add like some factories in there to the controllers, and you could also almost be writing Java. And
yeah,
it's these words like controller, they don't exist in RESTful APIs. REST is get, put, post, patch, delete. And I think Ruby excels in DSLs. Just call things by their name. And you don't need a router. You can just write what the API is. So I like how Grape keeps these things together. And in Rails, you explode the concerns to many different places.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a matter of preference, possibly. And I like that I get to like my entire API is in one place, and everything that's business logic is right there in the API that I'm implementing.
Right. So I did work on a project that was using Grape last year for a client, and they used it extremely heavily. So they had built this app in like Rails, I don't know, 3, 4. I'm not going to go into who they were because it's just not worth, hashing over what I liked or didn't like about their project. But I also upgraded their project from Rails 4 to Rails 6. And it was nice. One thing that was nice about Grape was that I didn't have to fuss with Grape. I didn't have to fuss with the API. But they had built a bunch of stuff that had a bunch of nesting, and they had built a bunch of other pieces to it to customize different ways the data was rendered. And granted, their application was not simple, but this is where I found pain with Grape, was that because I wasn't super familiar with all the ways you can customize it, I had to go learn some of the ins and outs. With the real simple APIs that I've built for my own stuff, I generally didn't run into this stuff. It's just like, hey, you hit a get, or you hit, whatever, and you give back entities with these fields on them, and Grape is super nice for that. But yeah, where they had gotten super, deep into, we need the API to behave in these ways on these things and maintain access controls on these other things, that's where it really got messy, where the different entities. Yeah. Anyway, and I'm trying to remember this, not having the code in front of me and not having worked on it in like 7-8 months. So, but yeah,
I
it
totally
was
think
very
you should-
complicated.
Yeah, you should ask for your money back, Charles. I'm totally with you. This is Grape will happily refund you.
Nobody's giving money back. They paid me. But yeah,
it's
anyway.
not. I agree. I think as always, applications grow with so many layers and complexities, and it's difficult to evolve regardless of what framework you use. Grape is simple. It's true. It's not. There's many non-trivial parts to it. Like I've built versioned APIs that can be pretty complicated. But I always tell people, if you're building on Grape, it's the way it's opinionated is there to both save you time and prevent you from making future mistakes. And it's both simple and opinionated in good ways, just like most of Ruby is. Rails is really the Swiss Army knife, and like one with 300 attachments.
Yep.
I will say, Grape to me, like, is definitely one of the best like examples of Ruby's expressiveness. In that, you could read, a Grape API and like understand it right away just looking at it, and I think that made it easy to get started with too. And I think it's a good example of just like, DSL design in general with Ruby and what you can do.
In pull requests from the, what is it now, 419 contributors to Grape, which is I think is a very impressive number, we always ask, what would you like a developer to write first using Grape? And then the next question is, can it be shorter? Or can they not write it at all? And then we get, this is how contributions go.
Yeah.
Great.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Not
And the other
ready at
thing,
all.
well, and that's the thing I like about the opinionated stuff is that effectively it's like, what 80-90% of the time are you going to not need to specify, right? That's where the opinions come in. And then when I want it to do something different from the norm, that's when I come back and say, okay, I have an option for this.
Yeah, and then we end up with Hashi, and then it's a nightmare. So
I haven't
easy
used
that
Hashi in a long
it's really
time.
bad.
I've had so many issues with Hashi in the past.
So it's written by the same people. It's all Hashi comes out of Intraidea, and
That's
we
right,
eventually
Intraidea.
ripped it out of Grape for the most part. It's Michael Blay and company. It's the same folks, but Hashi like went the dark side. It's so easy that its side effects are dangerous.
Yeah, we should bring you back on to talk about Hashi, but yeah.
There's got to be so many gems in there that you're like, how did this even get here?
I had written a blog post called "The Demonic Possession of Hashi Mash," and others have given talks about it at various Ruby conferences. Where like, so we fixed this problem, and then this is how it breaks in completely unobvious ways that takes 3 months to find out.
Right.
And then it's like the internet stops.
Yeah.
Because Hashi used to be in, it used to be a dependency in some kind, in a very popular library. I forget which one, something with authentication, and it was used like by Rails and everything in between. And then it broke everything, and then they were like, okay, we should probably rip it out. It's too easy to use.
Right. Was it auth?
It was, yeah, it was OmniAuth.
OmniAuth, okay. Which is always another fun one because the authentication strategy API was basically adopted by Device. But anyway, now we're way off track. So let's go back to Grape here for a bit. So if somebody wants to get started with Grape, what do they do? I guess it's the same for Rails or for Sinatra or for whatever other rack application you want to build it on.
I like to refer to one of the demo projects is like Grape on Rack or Grape on Rails, and it's basically a boilerplate. And you can mount Grape, you can require Grape in your gem file, and then basically start writing it. So you create a new API, it's a class, and then you mount it inside of an application, either a Rack application or a Rails application, and you curl your endpoint. So, usually you write some tests and stuff like that. So it's like 5 lines of code to get started. The README is super extensive and will get you through it. Pay a lot of attention to the documentation. That's it, and then off you go, and then you delete the rest of your Rails application once you've written everything with Grape, and then
used React.
Oh yeah, exactly. For the UI, it allows you to separate the two concerns. I think the real competitor is like GraphQL and React. That's where this is like a step forward, but if you are doing Rails versus Grape and React, you have some options.
No, that makes sense. If you like pain, you can put GraphQL into your Rails app. And I'm not joking.
It's funny.
It's such a pain in the neck.
I kind of always thought Grape as being like the precursor to GraphQL, in that when you're designing your Grape API, it's like almost like you're designing the shape of the data you want. And so like as you're going with Grape, you're like really just looking at the shapes of the REST API endpoints that you're trying to get out of it.
Well, it is REST. Like ideally, your objects will be very simple, and you can even adopt a model like HAL, and then everything's super consistent. So I've seen a lot of implementations where people would stand up like 5 Grape APIs, each responsible for a very specific concern, microservices, and then stitch them together. Stitch meaning forward the models out of it through GraphQL. But at that point, you might as well do GraphQL all the way. I think it's a great alternative. I love GraphQL for how nice it is to use on clients.
It's really nice on the front end.
Yeah, same thing.
So it's a pain in the neck to put in the back end.
I think there's really good libraries to build up GraphQL servers. It's a very different type of thing, and I think that's why Grape is, while I don't know, like its usage has, I wouldn't say plateaued, but certainly not growing fast.
Right.
It's excellent for a lot of things, but people who are building large applications today are looking, I think, for rather different solutions.
So, let's pull that thread a little bit. Why do you think people are looking for different solutions? Because I will say, as much as I complained about the complexity of the one app that I was talking about, it really is an easy tool to use. And so if you're building a semi-simple, straightforward API, I mean, it works terrific.
I think it's because we want the ease of use for a very different type of end user application these days. So it's much more mobile, and you have devices, you have screens that are very different. You have desktop applications. We want to build true isomorphic applications as well. So if you're building for the web, I would try to stand up a GraphQL API. I think if you're building for mobile, I would try to stand up a GraphQL API. If I'm building an API for a service where the API is the product, I still like Grape, and then maybe pick a RESTful model like HAL, where the resources are just very consistent, and you can use a generic client. So I like that. Like in HAL, you say you have links and you have items and collections, and all these things are very generic. So you can use a very generic client to query the API. You don't need to write a specific Ruby client for your application.
Oh, okay.
So you have tools like GraphLiant and a bunch of other tools that allow you to query a HAL API. And in Ruby, you can literally traverse objects. So you can do like product.orders.something like people. And all that is expressed server-side through a combination of calls to Grape APIs. So yeah, I think Grape is super simple. Depending on what you build, it might not be the right tool.
Right. So just to back up real quickly, because the other question I was going to ask is, when wouldn't you want to use Grape? And it sounds like, if you're much more focused on your front end, right, and providing for a React or Angular or Vue or something else that has a very convenient GraphQL client, then you may want to opt for GraphQL instead of Grape. I will say, though, that I have implemented GraphQL into Rails apps, and it's never fun, ever.
Yeah, I hear you. I think we.
So you're making a trade-off, is what I'm saying.
Fun versus actually something that's awesome to use on the client.
If it's not fun for me, I have a really, really hard time writing code. That's just me, right? I may be different from other people where it's just like, you know what, it's work, and I'll just sit down and buckle down and do it. For me, I mean, I would rather chew glass. So
yeah, it could be a style question. Like Grape has support for entities and many other things, I think, that are quite awesome. It's a good. It would be interesting to see someone who has really worked through examples and pros and cons between the two, and built the same application using microservices with Grape or the same application with GraphQL, and see how the implementations compare. I think that would be a great exercise.
That would be interesting. I'd be interested in seeing that. It might even make building in GraphQL fun for a minute.
Sure. So, but as an example, like if you were to build a service like Stripe, GraphQL is not your right answer. Like an API framework like Grape is probably the right answer. But if you're building Artsy, the website where you have very rich client-side applications, then you probably will want to have a GraphQL API. They don't have to be mutually exclusive either. They can coexist in many places.
Yep. Yeah, I always liken the graph analogy, like, graph is like a bunch of nodes that if you're dealing with relationships of data heavily, like graph is perfect for that, because the graph is the relationships. So it can represent them very easily. But like, I feel like most cases you don't need that, right? Like most data is not like so strongly coupled together. It's like you just want access to all of it, and then you can build it however you need to. And I feel like that's like RESTful APIs are great for that. Like you have various data you just need access to one-offs and collect it into how you want to shape your application that you're making, your system that you're architecting, right? Like, and oftentimes you don't need to have like, okay, well, I want to be able to like get access to that same data like from any point in my client. Like it just seems so unreasonable to force that by a default.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked on systems that had like invoices with line items, and the line items point to some other inventory, where it's, widgets or, whatever. And so you may go 2 or 3 levels deep, but then you kind of understand that whole thing to be the shape of an invoice. And so you could do it as a RESTful request, right? And it just sends you back all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the biggest downside of GraphQL is like, getting the performant joins together to get all that, gather all that data together. And like, I feel like if you just want to like generically make this data sets available, like I feel like doing some planning ahead of time with the data structures can be more advantageous than just giving access to it and then worrying about it later. And then you're like, well, how do we make this performant? Well, the way it's structured, we can't, but we made it, accessible and flexible on the client with GraphQL. And now we're just like kicking ourselves trying to like transform this to work more performantly.
Note that we're not arguing really Grape versus something else. We're arguing whether your API should be a RESTful API, should be a GraphQL API. And as all APIs, you have the same problems of N by M, fetching of data, deep relationships, ways to express things, types, clear errors, consistency, availability, partition tolerance. Like if I'm building a distributed system, especially, I will have very different concerns than if I'm building a single node application. So there's a lot going on. It's not really a framework question. It's more of a design of your entire application.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the thing that I'm really seeing here with a lot of it is that if and this is some of the trade-off too, is if I have a RESTful API that's built on something like Grape or whatever, maybe I just do it in Rails. If I can't get the data I want from the from a specific endpoint, or if it's sending back way more than I need and it's not performant enough, right? Then I start looking at, I have to create another endpoint for that. Whereas if the data is available through the GraphQL endpoint, then I can just attach to it. But as Valentino says, then you start getting into the other concerns on the back end as far as, how you can performantly, render it back out and do all the things there. And do I have all the relationships set up properly so that it does what I want it to? And, and so, and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are use cases where it makes way more sense to go one way than the other.
Yeah, and you have caching performance really matters. So there's depending on what API layout you choose, what standard you choose, you're gonna get very different patterns. I guess the summary, the advice that I would give is pick a standard for the APIs. If you're doing something RESTful, I wouldn't roll your own. I would use something like HAL. Like I like KTOS APIs. If you're doing GraphQL, well, that's the standard, and it behaves in certain consistent ways. But just try not to roll out something custom where you have custom rolled out pagination, custom rolled out structures.
Yeah.
Keep it simple and consistent, and think about it too. Like figure out how you're going to do versioning if you're going to do it at all. Kind of matters a lot, but from day one.
Right.
I see so many APIs that, in Amazon parlance, they have taken so many one-way doors that it's very difficult to evolve. And so you have this perpetual V1 with patches and backwards compatibility nonsense that is very, very hard to maintain. Anyway.
Yeah, that just reminds me of Swagger as a tool for API design.
Well, it works with Grape.
Yeah, it works with Grape. And
it does?
Yeah,
it does.
Grape Swagger is probably like the second most popular Grape ecosystem project.
Yeah, I think I remember adopting Swagger as part of the Grape documentation extension because it just like automatically did it and gave the docs right away. It's fantastic.
It's really nice.
Yeah,
because Grape is types your API. Like there is a whole parameter type system that used to be implemented on top of a library called Virtus and something else now, and that you define your parameters. So you now have a strong RESTful API that has optional required fields, and all these things have types. And you can serialize, deserialize objects. And so with Swagger, you get all this type spec and UI to play. Like you get a playground to query the Grape API out of the box. That's why people love it, because it's just like glue it together and you're done. You can build a Grape API in like half an hour.
I was just like, supporting your like HAL framework, like pick a framework and pick a standard, right? Because like being able to plug Grape right into Swagger, right? Like it just took care of so many other things that I didn't have to.
Yeah, clients.
Yeah.
You can generate a client for your API.
Yep.
Yeah, I always thought Swagger had to be a certain kind of API, but
a Grape kind of API.
A Grape kind of.
It sounds like a flavor of medicine, right? Take your medicine.
Cough, cough.
Right. So a couple things that I'm just going to throw out there. I know that some of these answers are easy to find, but it's nice when you're listening to a podcast like this to kind of get okay, it can do that, right? So one of the questions I have for you is, if I'm using something like device in my Rails app or Rodoth in Rhoda or something like that, how do I translate my users over to an API so that, do I have to switch to like token based, or is there some other way around it, or OAuth, or what am I looking at here?
Yeah, you should be implementing OAuth. And as an example, there's other ways, but there is all these frameworks plug on top of Grape. They're not really Grape's concerns, but we explain how to do this in the documentation. An API you don't want to mix permissions inside the objects, which is what Rails does with things like device. And you can make a lot of mistakes in Rails with device because there's no real clear place where authentication authorization happens in like some order. So it can be, I've seen people be very confused with what's called in what order and when is the permissioning happening. So with Grape, it's really a tangent concern. You layer it in all the right places. So it doesn't have like first class users or anything like that. You just use a gem like OmniAuth.
Okay. So you could, for example, on top end devs, right? We're using device. So I could just set up Doorkeeper on top of it and then use my access key on the API.
Yeah, I don't remember how to do it with device, because device is all about where you store these things and then the strategies that come on top. But in Grape, you would have an API like class, API, and you just include an OmniAuth strategy.
Okay.
And that is what is sitting in front of your API. And then if you're, OmniAuth will have, you'll include the OmniAuth strategy as a namespace, and then you can use whatever, because Grape is a rack-based application. You'll say something like use rack session cookie and use OmniAuth strategies, Facebook, and that's it. So you're not going to be checking any of this stuff. And then you'll configure OmniAuth by saying, I think it's like use OmniAuth builder, and you have to say what provider is and the keys and that kind of stuff. So again, it's tangent to the API, but it sits together and works in front of Grape to do permissioning. And it's rack mounted, so it's like an order stacks of things.
So then you use the OmniAuth strategy in front of some of the APIs that need to be authenticated, and your public APIs, you don't.
Yeah, it's an API. So like I have APIs which are token based, and then there's some that are user based, backed by a database. All this is like Doorkeeper is a fine way of doing it. Doorkeeper, OmniAuth, Auth2, like all this stuff. But for an API, you should be picking authentication for an API. Actually, now that I Google myself, I've written a whole blog post on how to do device and Grape in 2011. I'll paste it here in notes if you want to share it later. I don't think I wouldn't use this anymore. This is old. There's probably a better way to do this, but it does mix device and Grape, which I think is probably not a great idea.
I'll just post it to the comments on Facebook and YouTube, and then we'll put it in the show notes as well. But yeah.
Yeah, the way it works is the device has this thing called Warden, and then Warden.
Oh, so you're hooking into Warden, because Warden plays on rack.
Yeah.
What about testing your APIs?
Yeah, so this is rack test, and that works out of the box. Okay. There's no mystery. So all the tests, you should be writing tests, obviously, for your API. So it's like you get the path, and then you expect to have last response status and expect last response body and all this kind of stuff, which is very RESTful. There's no other nonsense in there. you don't try it like expect this call to respond with like some kind of JSON. Like you're manipulating a RESTful API response, so it's rack test.
Cool.
Yeah, easy.
So I see this is mostly like HTTP protocol related. Have you tried like bending it ever to be a different protocol?
Like if I wanted to do like what? gRPC protobuf?
Right.
It's a good question. So one of the things one of my colleagues is working on is enabling protobuf for OpenSearch, and we already have some POC. I think our next major release has HTTP2 support, and so the idea is to do protobuf on top of HTTP2 and gRPC on clients. So yeah, that sounds fun. Like I've not touched that at all with Grape. I don't know. I would probably want to write a separate library for this, but you have transport, you have the data being transported. Grape is very HTTP. Like it's really the language is HTTP, but it would be nice to magically improve throughput between clients and servers, and provide different protocols than HTTP. I just don't know if I guess there's Java has all these transport libraries and they're super generic, and in Ruby we tend to take a more opinionated way and say, well, there's a library for HTTP, there's another library for protobuf, and God knows what. So you're you don't need to mix the two in some abstract thing, because you're unlikely to switch between one and another. Probably there's more code doing adaptation of these things than code that actually does something useful. So like you can be configuring things with Spring, right? And you have a million configuration files, or you can just write the code that does the thing that you want. If you're building large enterprise scary applications, maybe Spring is the right answer for you. But if you are like me and want to make stupid things simple, and then lots of stupid simple things, maybe you want something else. Yeah, no, Grape is not expanding its scope. It's very much like what it is, and it's not like Rails keeps expanding its scope and adding features like turbo links or React or whatever else is happening in Rails. It's constantly evolving to be something new. It's like the best framework to build applications in Ruby. It's the best kitchen sink for Ruby, but in Ruby for applications that are just like general purpose applications. Grape is not that at all. It's not competing with Rails in any way.
I always thought the async framework was the kitchen sink of Ruby.
Yeah, I don't know much about what can be done in async. The only times I've touched async code is in the Slack Ruby client, and there's quite a bit of async going on in there because the server supports it. Yeah, like it's probably like another generation of frameworks will do async things. I don't know anything about it, to be honest.
I don't either.
What do you have any other ideas of a library to write or something? Like, what's the problem that you'd like to solve?
I mean, most recently, right, just like SSE, right, like server-side events or server-sent events. So with OpenAI as an example, like long-form streamed responses or, HTTP2 interfaces, kind of, but it seems like less bigger. It seems like a lot of these large language model related things aren't built on HTTP2. It's more gone toward the server sent events related streaming protocols. So that's where I've been recently, and so it's hard because the protocols are simple, but there's not really a lot of support for it.
Someone asked as of last week a question about streaming support in Grape, and Grape of course supports streaming. it's not HTTP2, but you can start a response and then stream incremental responses down to your client as they come in. So in their example is exactly that, is that they are having a conversation with OpenAI and they're getting responses incrementally and want to send them downstream incrementally. That totally
Oh,
works.
nice.
That entire support is in Grape and it's supported in Rack, and it works with all these frameworks, and you can literally see the responses go incrementally one after another with like 1 second delay. I'll dig up the GitHub issue. Great.
Yeah, I mean, the next issue I have is like testing that. Like, I've had to like, you know, get a VCR cassette and replay it that way, and it's still not like your clients have to support that. Does Grape support like replaying like an event stream?
In like with pauses. So I've written for this streaming issue, I've written the test, but the test does. I've written an integration test with Capybara, which this is really hacky, I think. The UI, there's a UI that makes a AJAX request to my Grape server that does a loop of 5 seconds, sleeps 1 second every second, and returns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the client, the JavaScript says on progress, render the data. So in Capybara, you will see as a result 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5. So the total response will eventually be the sum of these things.
Some of them.
So that's how I wrote the test for streaming.
That's how I've done it. So I'm just curious.
But you can you should,
not that it's bad. It's not. It does it right. Like,
well, you can stub and say that Grape called stream with like this argument.
Right.
You don't need to test that. In this case, somebody was claiming that it doesn't work, right? So, but you have, I think you have, and the problem was a bug in Rack, and it was in like a very specific version of Rack. And the demo was that like, look, it does work, except in the specific version of Rack. So this is a bug in Rack. That's where the test belongs, of that you can actually stream. But for an API, all you care about is that it returns you the right data. So what's a return from your API? It's the total data that is going to be returned at the end. Whether it's streamed or not streamed, you should defer to the Rack library that is doing the correct thing or not the correct thing. That's how I think it. Like the API, did it receive the stream? Like, yes. The stream is just the transport. You care that your API has the correct data, and you can just do expect last response body to equal the total thing.
Yeah, I guess the other side of that is, cases like OpenAI not following the convention for the event stream protocol, and how do you handle those test cases where the response? I guess you do it the same way. You stitch them together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's all moving very fast. It's very exciting. Don't write tests. It's moving much faster than your. Who needs tests with Gen AI?
It's gonna error anyway. Like they'll be down next week.
We are just missing the HTTP error code. Like, I'm not sure. 376. I'm not sure.
So I'm curious, like, how do you come into like taking on Grape and Hashi and all this? Like, how does that, like, are you super motivated to just like take on these projects, or?
Hell no. As you know, open source is a great world where one person out, there will be 479 contributors, and this one person that will be awful, and they will ruin it for you. So I think for me, it's always been scratch my own itch. I really believe in that open source software is good for business. So I totally don't care about it being great for humanity or improving the world, or it's free because it benefits someone. I don't care. I was born in the USSR, so I've already lived in one communist country, and so I come to it as I need something, and then I really think open source is the way to go because I can build on top of what other people have built, or I can start something that nobody has built, and I don't need to do it all the way. Right? I just need to do the parts that I need, and so I can help myself in my own selfish business or otherwise needs. And the best place to do it is in open source because I can stop at any time. There's no expectations. At least most people don't have any. I can help myself. So as long as I have time and hands and a brain, I can write it. And my goal has always been to just do that. Just do the parts that interest you. Eventually, if a project is something that I need constantly, I'll start wanting to improve it, not just contribute to it. And that's what happened with things like Grape. I got interested in the topics. I was writing code myself, but also other people were writing code, and it was a way for me to learn what other people are doing. And sometimes you have like an amazing contributor come in and make a significant improvement. And I learned so much from just looking at the contribution, code reviewing it, for example. It's like one of the great maintainers last week made a pull request with Zeitwerk, replacing Autoload with Zeitwerk. I don't know what this thing is, but I read the PR, I read about Zeitwerk, I learned a lot about why and what it is, and I became a better engineer by doing so. And I think they did a much better job than I could have at this, but they have a real need, and I'm just a gatekeeper on their way to having this code merged. So we write awesome software this way. And for me, collaborating with really strong engineers that don't work for the same company is a wonderful experience. So I just get sucked in because these open source projects don't follow organizational boundaries. They don't have deadlines. They don't have a business riding on them where non-engineers participate. So it's like my own people, and I like working with them. And then it's very satisfying. That's how I get. That's why I do this. That's why I still maintain Grape, because I only use it for pet projects. I could just check out.
Yeah,
Like I
I
haven't
agree with you a
written
lot
Ruby
on
in
the.
network with Grape in like 5 years.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I share your sentiment a lot on the open source just being like a rewarding experience for yourself, right? Like,
and the
yeah,
money.
yeah.
The money is great. But to be I'm half facetious about this because open source has absolutely enabled me to have a career in which I'm paid a lot of money to write software. Like I'm an individual contributor and was CTO of a company for 8 years. So I was able to go back to being an individual contributor because a large company values my contributions as an IC. And 99% of that work has been open source. So people can see it. I don't need to, if people ask me like what it is that you do, I'm like, look at GitHub. Here are the contributions. Like you know how I work by reading those. And it's not all the work, but it's a big part of my work. I am paid to write open source software today. I mean, I'm paid to create business value for the commercial business for which I work, but
right.
the means to that end are open source software.
Yeah, I use open source software all the time, right? And so like, if I'm ever like, if I ever use or add a new package or something, I'll like go look at it and just see are there any open issues like I could just do or like that align with what I'm working on. And then sometimes there are, and I just do them, right? Like, and it's really like that easy to get involved in open source. And also like, instead of just like using everything, which early on it's very easy to do, especially if you're not like familiar enough, or you feel like there's that distance thing where you're like, I'm not good enough to participate even, right? Which I think is a lot of a hard problem with open source. Is there is that kind of like, uh, I forget the word for it, but
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter
Mhm.
syndrome. There's so much of that.
I mean,
Yep.
I wrote one unit test for Lucene, and it's like a terrifying experience because
I can't
you have like a bunch of rocket scientists that are writing deep search engine stuff. And here I am, like trying to argue with someone that like this needs a test, and I think we can write one. And it's like compare the result is 1 or 2. And so no,
Yeah.
it's imposter syndrome is something you'll never get rid of.
Yeah.
Especially like these things have been around for so long. There's great 479 contributors. Like
Yeah.
this is what you're up against. It's this many people. So on people who are maintaining these projects, on them to make this super easy and welcoming. And then of course on the contributors to stick around. I write so many times in comments after the 15th time that I asked the contributor to please put a period at the end of the sentence in your typoed readme. Like every time I type this, I'm like, just thank you for hanging in here with me. Like, I'm gonna be OCD about all this stuff because I want your change.
Right.
I just want it to be perfect as if I had written it, but you're writing it. You get all the credit, like you did it. But I'm gonna keep the bar very, very high, including for small stupid things. So the
Yeah.
only difference will be how long it will take. And so please, like you'll learn something from this experience, and I might learn something from this experience, and it will be done. But just you have to persevere.
Awesome. That said, I'm going to change gears for us and start wrapping up, mainly because I have a hard stop in 20 minutes and I never know how long picks are going to go. But if people want to learn more about Grape or check in with you on social media or GitHub, where do they find you, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm dblock everywhere. DBLOCK. I have a website. It's dblock.org. So if you're interested in coding, it's code.dblock.org. If you're interested in running, it's run.dblock.org. If you're interested in art, it's art.dblock.org. On Twitter, I'm dblock.org, spelled out DOTORG. So lots of it's a nickname from the Computer Underground, which is we could talk about this for the next 2 hours, but there was in like 1993 someone brought me to this garage and like pick a username, and it was a wall of modems, and I said Block because that's a pseudonym my dad used for a long time after the Russian writer Alexander Block. He used it because we had immigrated to Europe from the USSR and he didn't want to use his real last name for different reasons. So I did Block, but it had to be 6 characters, so it became D Block. And and then I hesitated to the rap band D Block wanted my domain name, but they're from the Bronx. I didn't love their music, so I didn't sell.
I love it.
So I'm still D Block. They're great though. They're great people.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Valentino, do you have some picks?
Yeah, I got a couple here. The first one, I was playing around with GPTs, OpenAI's GPT stuff, and I made a software architect mentor, so I can help hash through ideas as I'm designing systems and stuff. And I'm nowhere near a software architect, so I hope to maybe aspire to be one eventually. So I've like uploaded a bunch of documents related to design patterns and system frameworks and things like that, and mashed them all together into documents that I could use for its retrieval system. And it's been really fun. I'll just like throw it on the Chat GPT app and just go for a walk and talk with it back and forth, and it's been really kind of fun. So check that out if you want. It's kind of fun. And I'm not really sold on the whole GPT thing. I don't know. I don't know if they're like App Store or whatever will actually bear any fruit, but it's the builder that they have where you just like chat to build whatever new thing of it. It's an interesting concept, and it's kind of fun to play with. And the other one I have is if you're not familiar, Simone Gertz is like a pseudo inventor. Like she's behind the truck, or was it the Tesla truck original? I forget what she called it. It was like a Truckula. I think it was Truckula. But she designs all these small little things, and she came up with a foldable hanger. And so she has a Kickstarter now where you can put your clothes on a hanger and fold it in half for like if you have a small closet. It's pretty neat.
Very cool. Yeah, can you put links to those in the show notes or in the comments? I'm going to throw out a couple of picks. So I usually do a board game pick, and I'm trying to remember the last game I picked on one of the other shows, or on this show. I'll just pick one that I've played recently. It's called Acropolis. I might have picked this one on this show before. If I have, I'm sorry. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.79, so it's a real easy game for people who don't like the deep extended time games. And what you do is you're basically building a city, and you have they're hex squares, but you get them in basically tiles of 3 hex squares, and you can either expand your city outward or you can expand your city upward, and you get scored based on the different colors. So you get a star for every or you get stars on your tiles, and then the stars is the multiplier for the color that the star is for every one that counts, right? So red hexes have to be on the edge. Yellow hexes have to be not touching other yellow hexes. The blue ones only count if they're part of the largest group of blues. And then, when you place the tiles, whatever stars are showing on top are the multipliers for those. I think all the greens count. I think there are purple ones that are not on the edge. I can't remember. But anyway, it's real fun. You play 1 to 4 players. I've played it with 3 and 4 players, and it was fun. So I'll put a link to it in the show notes and into the comments on YouTube and stuff. And then one of them is going to be for Board Game Geek, just so you can go and get more information on it. The other one's going to be an affiliate link, and I'll just call that out on Amazon. Besides that, I just finished. I listen to a lot of books on Amazon. Some of them have kind of a political bent to them, and I haven't been picking them. But I think I'm gonna take the chance, and then people can tell me that they're not comfortable with it, and I can tell them that's nice. But he makes a lot of good points, and it'd be interesting. I'd be really interested to just talk through some of the points in this book with other folks. But the book's called Unwoke. It's by Ted Cruz. And just talk through some of the ideas in it. I tend to agree with Ted Cruz on a lot of things. But sometimes I'm also aware that I'm not hearing the other side. And so, just to make sure that I understand the issues from other points of view, I'm happy to have those conversations. But Unwoke, I thought it was a well put together book. The real issue I have with a lot of, especially the federal politics, is that neither party makes me very happy at the federal level. I tend to get more involved in the state and local politics just because those tend to hit closer to home, literally and figuratively, right? Because your state is what sets your educational policy. Your state is what sets, usually is the entity that's managing your roads and things like that. Your city is, their growth. Like, we have a major traffic problem in the city I live in, and it's because they've opted to put in a lot of high density housing, and they hadn't paid attention to the infrastructure, right? So anyway, so I tend to get involved in those because, every day I have to drive my kids to school and I have to drive through that traffic. It's like, all right, why are we not thinking about this stuff? So anyway, I'll put a link to that as well. But That's the latest book I've read. The one I'm reading now, and this one I'm really liking too. I'm not all the way through it, so my opinion may change, but I kind of doubt it. It's called No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's by Dr. Robert Glover. It's mostly aimed at men who are trying to find satisfaction in their life. But and I identify with some of the things in it, not others. But I know people who, on some of the things that I don't particularly struggle with, that do struggle with it. And so I think this would be a helpful book if you're a man and you're not satisfied with your life and you feel like you're always taking care of everybody else and, you know, kind of facing some burnout and stuff like that. This book kind of covers a lot of those ideas. So I'll put links to those in the show notes as well. Daniel, what are your picks?
Let's see. If you want to talk politics, we'll go into Twitter, but so I won't go here. But I'll recommend an art book. So for a change, paste it here in comments. One of my favorites is Self-Portrait by Man Ray. Will you repost the link to the other channel? And then I think for a tech pick, be quick. So I work on OpenSearch. It's a search engine. It's a fork of Elasticsearch and Kibana. It's quite a wild, large open source project that is doing quite well, very well actually. And it's doing a ton of Gen AI these days, and it's 100% open source. I think you'll find a lot of places both to contribute and a lot of low-hanging fruit and a lot of really complicated stuff. There's many hundreds of contributors to this, but it's also 112, I think, GitHub repos in the OpenSearch GitHub organization under GitHub OpenSearch project. So if you're a fan of Go, which you shouldn't be, you can go and contribute to OpenSearch Go. And if you're a fan of Rust, you can do OpenSearch Rust. It's there's a bit for everyone. And if you like factories, producers, connector factories, and other Java thing, there's a whole 1.5 million lines of code core. Was it 4 million? I forget. Some millions of lines of code search engine that's been around for quite some time. Lots of plugins like KNN, Nearest Neighbor Search, and observability, and so on and so forth. So amazing place to get started in open source and be writing production code in the end with a lot of support from other contributors, maintainers. That is that. That will be my picks for today. Oh, maybe one more. If you like to think very differently, one of the websites that I always recommend to people is Arena, which is really it's hard to describe, but it's like a platform for connecting ideas and building knowledge. That's what its name is. It's been around for quite some time. It's a user-supported independent social network for something like between Delicious and Pinterest, and it's its own thing. It's like nothing else. So if you obsessively bookmark things, then that's definitely for you. And check it out. It's written in Ruby for the most part, as far as I know.
Oh, nice.
That's it for me.
All right, good deal. Well, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I get the rest of these links in the comments, and then we'll wrap it up. But thanks for coming. This was fun.
Thank you for having me.
Just got one more book off of my picks that I'll get in there, and then we'll end the stream.
Were you at Etsy when they were doing the rapid Rails generator?
Artsy. Etsy is a whole other company. Yeah.
Artsy.
Rails generator?
Yeah, I remember listening to a podcast where somebody from Artsy was on, and they were talking about the rapid prototype that they're able to do based on a scaffold that they had that had all of their core services and stuff. built into generators, and then any Rails G would use the generator to scaffold the new application. So they just had thousands of applications.
Yeah,
I'm going to end the stream, but I think we can keep talking when I do it.
Yeah, I forget